smoking ever really worth it? When a cigarette meant class, rebellion. In Hollywood's golden age, smoke wasn't just a prop, it was the industry's quiet secret. Stars made it look irresistible, on screen and off, turning a risky habit into a trend millions followed. But behind the charm, the truth wasn't so glamorous. And trust me, number 9, that one's going to catch you off guard. In the golden age of television, Rod Serling was one of those rare minds who didn't just entertain audiences, he challenged them. As the creator of The Twilight Zone, Serling brought viewers into a world where every story carried a deeper truth, often reflecting the fears and anxieties of real life. His writing was sharp, intelligent, and unforgettable, earning him a reputation as one of the greatest storytellers in Hollywood. But despite all that success, Serling never truly felt at ease with it. Unlike many stars who chased fame, Serling seemed almost haunted by it. After The Twilight Zone became a cultural phenomenon, the pressure to recreate that success began to weigh heavily on him. What if he had already done his best work? What if everything that followed fell short? Those thoughts didn't just pass through his mind. They stayed. Serling turned to habits that felt small at first. Cigarettes became constant, up to 4 packs a day. Alcohol wasn't about celebration, but about quieting the noise in his head. From the outside, it looked like a man working hard, pushing through stress like so many others in Hollywood. But inside, he was wearing himself down. As the years went on, that pressure didn't ease. It built. His health began to decline, though not in ways that immediately stopped him. Like many people, he kept going, believing he could manage it. In 1975, Serling underwent bypass surgery due to severe heart issues caused by years of strain on his body. During the operation, his heart gave out. He passed away at just 50 years old, leaving behind a legacy that still influences storytelling to this day. Rod Serling didn't lose his life because he lacked talent or opportunity. He lost it because the quiet habits he relied on to cope eventually took control. His story is a reminder that success on the outside means very little if the person behind it is slowly breaking down, and that the things we do every day to handle pressure can either protect us or quietly destroy us over time. Yul Brynner was the kind of man you couldn't ignore. With his shaved head, piercing gaze, and commanding presence, he dominated both Hollywood and Broadway like few others ever could. From The King and I to countless stage performances, Brynner wasn't just a star, he was a force. But behind that powerful image was a habit that never loosened its grip. Brynner smoked heavily, 5 packs of cigarettes a day. Not occasionally, not socially, constantly. It became part of his identity, as natural to him as stepping onto a stage. For years, it didn't seem to slow him down. He looked strong, in control, untouchable, until reality caught up. The same habit that once felt harmless began to take its toll. Brynner was diagnosed with lung cancer, and the man who once filled every room with energy slowly became a shadow of himself. His voice weakened, his body followed. But what he did next is what makes his story different. Before his death, Brynner recorded a message for the American Cancer Society. Sitting in front of the camera, visibly frail, he looked straight into the lens and said something that stayed with millions of people. Now that I'm gone, don't smoke. Whatever you do, just don't smoke. He knew that message would only be broadcast after he was gone. That was the point. It wasn't a performance. It wasn't a role. It was a warning. Yul Brynner didn't just leave behind films and applause. He left behind a moment of truth, one that showed how quickly strength can fade when a dangerous habit is left unchecked, and how sometimes the most powerful advice comes from someone who learned it too late. Spencer Tracy trapped in the clutches of vices that ravaged his adult life. For years, Tracy lived inside a routine that didn't look dangerous on the surface. Alcohol to steady the nerves, cigarettes, one after another, without a second thought, pills to keep going when exhaustion crept in. Add the weight gain, the stress, the long nights, and it all began stacking up in silence. Just damage, building. By the time he reached his 60s, his body was already carrying the bill. The turning point arrived like a thunderclap on a fateful July 21st, 1963. No warning, no build-up, just a sudden collapse. Tracy was rushed to the hospital, struggling to breathe, his body finally pushing back after years of being ignored. That moment wasn't random. It was the result of everything that came before it, and it didn't stop there. In 1965, the diagnosis hit: hypertensive heart disease. From that point on, life didn't fall apart dramatically. It tightened, slowly and relentlessly. His world shrank, his strength faded. The man who once filled movie screens was now confined to his own home, trapped in a body that could no longer keep up. But even then, he wasn't completely alone. Katharine Hepburn stayed by his side, not for the spotlight, not for the legacy, but for him. Through the silence, the decline, and the long days that followed, her presence became the one thing that didn't weaken. That connection wasn't just love, it was survival. A reminder that when everything else breaks down, who stands beside you matters more than anything you ever achieved. Spencer Tracy's story isn't about one bad decision. It's about the dangerous comfort of thinking this is fine while your body keeps score in the background. Because the truth is, damage doesn't announce itself. It accumulates quietly, patiently, until one day it collects everything at once. And when that day comes, no amount of talent, fame, or second chances can negotiate with it. Bette Davis, known as the Queen of the Warner Lot, had a heavy smoking habit that aged her significantly, yet she still lived to the age of 81. She holds the record as the first actor to receive 5 consecutive Academy Award nominations for acting, winning 2, much like her friend Olivia de Havilland. While some argue that Humphrey Bogart made smoking look cool on screen, others believe that title belonged to Bette Davis. During a roast, Henry Fonda once joked that after 38 years around her, he had cigarette burns to prove it. Surprisingly, Davis only smoked in about a quarter of her films and was never a spokesperson for any cigarette brand. Still, throughout her career, she became closely associated with smoking on screen. The reason was simple: she believed in realism. When her characters smoked, she insisted on doing it properly, keeping a lit cigarette in her hand throughout scenes, mimicking real-life behavior down to the smallest detail. That commitment didn't stay in front of the camera. Off-screen, the habit took over completely. Bette Davis smoked around 4 packs of Vanguard cigarettes a day. She claimed she couldn't go more than 10 minutes without lighting another. Interviews, waiting rooms, even the dentist's chair, there was always a cigarette in her hand. Smoking wasn't just a habit anymore. It was constant. Despite this, she managed to live a long life without clear smoking-related disease. She eventually passed away from breast cancer, but reports suggest she continued smoking nearly 100 cigarettes a day until the very end. What makes her story stand out isn't just the number, it's the consistency. Compared to Rod Serling, Yul Brynner, and Spencer Tracy, Bette Davis didn't collapse early or show obvious warning signs. She simply kept going. And that's the danger. Because not every habit breaks you quickly. Some stay with you for decades, becoming so normal that you stop questioning them. And by the time you realize how deep it runs, it's no longer something you control. Sammy Davis, Jr. of the Rat Pack, built his image on a lifestyle that looked effortless: drinking, women, and cigarettes, alongside Frank Sinatra and Dean Martin. But much of that image was staged. Whiskey was often apple juice, and the wild persona was carefully performed. Smoking, however, was real. Sammy smoked constantly, even on stage. One of his signature moves was taking a drag mid-song, then releasing the smoke as he hit the next note. It looked smooth, controlled, almost iconic, but for a singer it was damage happening in real time. Nat King Cole warned him early: the heat from cigarette smoke was slowly destroying his vocal cords. Sammy didn't stop. By the 1980s, the consequences surfaced. His voice began to fail, and a throat specialist confirmed the truth. Inflamed nodules caused by years of smoking while performing. The damage had been building quietly the entire time. Sammy Davis Jr. didn't lose his image. He lost control over the one thing that defined him: his voice. And that's the warning. What looks harmless, even impressive in the moment, can slowly take away your strongest asset. In real life, there's no performance to hide behind. The habits you repeat every day don't disappear. they stay, and one day, they show up all at once. Jackie Gleason skyrocketed to fame as the unforgettable Ralph Cramden in The Honeymooners, a larger-than-life presence who filled every frame with energy. His size, his voice, his humor, everything about him was big, and audiences loved him for it. Off-screen, that same larger-than-life didn't slow down. Gleason's appetite matched his stature. His weight moved between two extremes, often climbing past 300 pounds. Meals weren't small or measured. He could sit through multiple courses in one sitting, finishing with an entire gallon of ice cream. It wasn't occasional indulgence. It was routine. Food wasn't the only excess. He drank heavily, treating whiskey like water. A scotch on the rocks became part of his daily rhythm, and sobriety was rare. Alongside that came constant smoking, up to 5 packs a day, one habit feeding the next, each one reinforcing the other. His size made movement difficult. His energy dropped. Even his personal life felt the strain. Gleason once joked that for a man his size, intimacy became much ado about puffing. It sounded like humor, but it carried truth. The lifestyle wasn't just affecting his health. It was affecting everything. He kept going the same way for years, until the consequences finally caught up. Jackie Gleason passed away at 71 from colon cancer, leaving behind not just a legacy of laughter, but a clear example of what unchecked excess can become. His story isn't about one bad habit, it's about stacking them together. Eating too much, drinking too much, smoking too much. Each one manageable on its own, until they combine. Because the danger isn't always one thing. It's when everything becomes a little too much at the same time. And when that balance tips, the body doesn't negotiate, it responds. Errol Flynn, in the late 1930s, was one of Hollywood's biggest stars, leading films like The Adventures of Robin Hood and The Charge of the Light Brigade. On screen, he was bold, charming, unstoppable. Off-screen, that same energy turned into something far harder to contain. Flynn lived fast. He shared a house with David Niven they jokingly called Cirrhosis by the Sea, a place known for non-stop parties. Alcohol was constant. At times, he even injected vodka into oranges to sneak it onto film sets where drinking was banned. Alongside that came banned substances use, including opium, and a lifestyle built on excess. The stories followed him everywhere. Wild behavior, reckless relationships, and scandals the studios tried to keep quiet. His reputation grew just as quickly as his fame, but it didn't bring stability. Even with multiple marriages, he never found anything lasting. By the late 1940s, the damage began to show. His appearance changed. His health declined. Though he briefly returned in the 1950s, often playing characters not far from his real life, his body was already worn down. At just 50 years old, Flynn suffered a fatal heart attack. The autopsy revealed something far more shocking. His body resembled that of a 75-year-old man. Years of drinking, smoking, and banned substances use had aged him beyond recognition from the inside. The body doesn't always break suddenly. Sometimes it ages faster than you realize, quietly absorbing every habit, every late night, every just this once, until one day, you're no longer living at your real age. You're living at the age your habits have pushed you to. Errol Flynn didn't just lose years from his life. He lost the quality of those years long before the end came. Because in real life, you don't feel the damage as it builds. You feel it when it's already too late to take it back. Cut the habit early. Because if you don't, your future won't match your age. It'll match your habits. John Wayne, known for his iconic roles in more than 170 films, including 142 westerns, dominated Hollywood for over 4 decades. Standing tall, strong, and commanding, he became the face of the American cowboy, tough, fearless, and unbreakable. But that image didn't tell the full story. Behind the scenes, Wayne lived a lifestyle that slowly worked against him. He struggled with weight, lacked physical fitness, and relied heavily on habits that wore his body down. Smoking started early, back in high school, and never stopped. It wasn't occasional. It was constant, from morning until night. As the day went on, his behavior often changed, enough that directors tried to finish filming early to avoid the effects. The man who looked controlled on screen was dealing with something very different off-screen. In the 1950s, Wayne didn't just smoke, he promoted it. He appeared in advertisements for Camel cigarettes, reinforcing an image that millions admired. At his peak, he was reportedly smoking up to 7 packs of unfiltered cigarettes a day. That level doesn't stay without consequences. In 1964, he underwent major surgery to remove most of his left lung due to the damage caused by smoking. It was a serious warning, but not the end of the story. Years later, complications from stomach cancer claimed his life at 72. John Wayne built a career on strength. But strength on the outside doesn't protect what's happening inside. His habits didn't take him down all at once. They stayed with him for years, shaping his health long before the final outcome. That's where the warning becomes clear. Because habits don't care how strong you look. They don't care about success, reputation, or legacy. If they're repeated long enough, they win. And by the time the damage is visible, it's already been there for years. Clark Gable in the golden era of Hollywood reigned as the King of Hollywood, a title earned through sheer presence in unforgettable roles. His portrayal of Rhett Butler in Gone with the Wind made him a legend, while It Happened One Night secured his place at the top. Fame came fast, and for a time, it seemed nothing could touch him. But his life didn't stay within the safety of the spotlight. At the height of his career, Gable stepped away and joined the United States Air Force. He flew combat missions, trained with bomber crews, and faced real danger far from movie sets. He earned the Distinguished Air Medal and the Distinguished Flying Cross, even drawing the attention of Adolf Hitler himself. Yet the real threat wasn't in the sky. It was in what he did every single day. Smoking became a constant, 3 packs of unfiltered cigarettes daily for over 30 years, alongside cigars and pipe tobacco. It wasn't occasional. It was relentless. Over time, the toll became unavoidable. Years of excess built quietly, placing repeated strain on his body. By 1960, after multiple heart attacks, Clark Gable's life came to an end at 59. His health had been worn down not by one moment, but by decades of habit. Gable survived war, pressure, and risk, but not routine. That's the warning. Because the most dangerous thing isn't always what feels extreme. It's what feels normal, repeated every day, without pause, until it becomes the reason everything stops. Do you enjoy videos like this? What other topics would you like to see next? Let me know in the comments below. Humphrey Bogart didn't just play cool, he defined it. With that calm voice, sharp eyes, and a cigarette always in hand, he turned smoking into a symbol. In films like Casablanca, it wasn't just acting, it looked like a lifestyle people wanted to copy. But that image didn't come from nowhere. Early in his career, long dialogue scenes felt stiff, repetitive. Smoking was introduced as a simple way to break the monotony, something to do with his hands, something to hold the audience's attention. It worked. Too well. The cigarette became part of the character, and then part of the man. Off-screen, Bogart smoked heavily, around 2 packs a day. Add to that a steady flow of alcohol, and the cool image started to carry a cost. The coughing became constant. Fatigue set in. Memory began slipping. The signs were there, but like many people, he kept going. Because when something becomes part of your identity, it's hard to question it. By the mid-1950s, the damage could no longer be ignored. After years of putting it off, Bogart finally saw a doctor. The diagnosis was clear: esophageal cancer, directly linked to his long-term smoking. The same habit that made him iconic was now ending his story. Humphrey Bogart didn't just influence movies, he influenced millions of people watching him. And that's what makes it hit harder, because what looks powerful on screen doesn't always translate the same way in real life. Smoking gave him presence. It gave him style. But it also took something back, quietly, over time, until there was nothing left to negotiate. Because the truth is simple. Not everything that looks good ends well. And there you have it. 10 of the heaviest smokers in Hollywood history. The big screen made it look stylish, effortless, almost irresistible. But behind the smoke, the truth hits different. Some paid the price. Some managed to fight back. Either way, it was never just a harmless habit. So next time it looks cool, remember how these stories ended. Thanks for watching, and take care of yourself out there. What if cigarettes were the real stars of Hollywood? On screen, they look cool. But in real life, they're incredibly dangerous. From legends to rebels, these icons not only act but also smoke incessantly. And the price they pay, far greater than fame. Let's take a look at some of the worst smokers in Hollywood history. And yes, things quickly get worse. Desi Arnaz, the man who made America laugh as Ricky Ricardo, lived a life full of charm, success, and non-stop pressure. But behind that image was a habit he never let go of: constant smoking. On the set of I Love Lucy, cigarettes and cigars were always within reach. It wasn't just for the camera. It was part of his daily routine. Whether working, relaxing, or dealing with stress, Desi kept smoking. As the years went on, nothing changed. The fame grew, the workload increased, and the habit stayed. By the time he reached his 60s, the damage had already built up. In 1986, Desi Arnaz was diagnosed with lung cancer. At that point, it was no longer about quitting. It was about surviving. During his illness, Lucille Ball remained by his side. Despite their divorce, she continued to support him. They spent time together in the hospital, watching old episodes of I Love Lucy, revisiting moments from a life that had once seemed effortless. On November 30th, 1986, what would have been their 46th wedding anniversary, they spoke on the phone one last time. Just 2 days later, on December 2nd, Desi Arnaz passed away at the age of 69. His death came shortly before Lucille Ball received the Kennedy Center honors, a moment marked by both recognition and loss. Desi's story shows the long-term impact of smoking clearly and directly. Years of heavy use weaken the lungs, damage the body, and lead to serious diseases like lung cancer. What begins as a daily habit builds into irreversible harm over time, and by the time symptoms appear, the damage is often already beyond control. Jack Webb, born John Randolph Webb, grew up in difficult conditions, raised by his mother and grandmother in poverty, with no father present. From a young age, he also struggled with severe asthma, a condition that should have made him avoid cigarettes completely. But instead of staying away, Webb went in the opposite direction. Despite his fragile health, he became a heavy smoker, consuming up to 3 packs of cigarettes a day. Smoking wasn't occasional, it was constant. It became part of his daily routine, just like his other habits: chili dogs, late-night card games, and drinking sessions with fellow cast members. Nights were long, often filled with smoke and alcohol, yet Webb still showed up early the next morning, sharp and ready to work by 7 a.m. On the surface, it looked like discipline and stamina, but underneath, his body was paying the price. Years of smoking, combined with lack of rest and unhealthy habits, slowly wore him down. His asthma didn't disappear, it worsened under the strain. The constant exposure to smoke made breathing harder, putting even more pressure on his lungs. By the late 1960s, the effects were visible. Webb looked significantly older than his actual age, his appearance reflecting years of internal damage. Jack Webb's story is a clear example of how ignoring health warnings can accelerate physical decline. Smoking heavily over time, especially with existing conditions like asthma, doesn't just harm the lungs. It speeds up aging, weakens the body, and reduces overall resilience. What seems manageable in the short term builds into lasting damage that cannot be easily undone. Joni Mitchell's story reflects how attitudes toward smoking have changed over time and how dangerous habits can take hold early. She began smoking at just 9 years old, long before the risks were widely understood. By the time medical evidence made the dangers clear, nicotine addiction had already taken a strong grip. For Joni, smoking wasn't occasional. It became part of her identity, something she openly admitted she enjoyed and even supported through her early music career. But one detail stands out more than anything else. Despite knowing the risks, she continued smoking during pregnancy, while still hoping her daughter would be born healthy. That contradiction says a lot. It's not a balanced or logical viewpoint. It shows how addiction can override judgment. When someone understands the danger but continues anyway, it's no longer about choice alone, it's about dependence. Years later, Joni remained unapologetic, even calling smoking one of life's great pleasures. From a modern perspective, that statement feels incomplete, because the reality is much harsher. Long-term smoking damages the lungs, weakens the body, and increases the risk of serious disease. And during pregnancy, those risks don't just affect one person, they extend to the child. Her story highlights a difficult truth. People can know the consequences and still continue harmful habits, not because the risks aren't real, but because addiction changes how those risks are perceived. It makes dangerous behavior feel normal, even justified. So instead of focusing on whether her opinion is right or wrong, the real issue is the disconnect between what we know and what we do, and that's where lasting harm begins. Do you agree or disagree with the view that smoking is enjoyable and downplays the dangers it poses? What do you think about that statement? Let us know in the comments. David Jansen lived fast, worked hard, and paid the price far too early. Best known for his intense screen presence, his off-screen life was dominated by two habits he never controlled: heavy drinking and relentless chain smoking. At his peak, Jansen was consuming up to 4 packs of cigarettes a day. This wasn't occasional stress relief, it was constant, from morning to night. Over time, the damage built quietly. Smoking at that level puts extreme strain on the lungs, the heart, and the entire circulatory system. Add heavy alcohol use, and the body begins to break down even faster. For Jansen, this combination created a dangerous chain reaction inside his body, long before any visible warning signs appeared. At just 48 years old, his life came to a sudden end. The cause? A heart attack. But the full story became clearer after his death. A post-mortem examination revealed extensive damage to his lungs and mouth, clear evidence of long-term smoking. His liver also showed severe signs of alcohol abuse. These weren't isolated issues. They worked together, weakening his system over time. Doctors concluded that the buildup of damage likely led to blockages in 3 major arteries. When those arteries failed, his heart could no longer function properly. The result was fatal and irreversible. David Jansen's story is a direct example of how sustained heavy smoking and drinking don't just harm one part of the body, they attack everything at once. The effects may not show immediately, but they accumulate year after year. And when they finally surface, they often do so suddenly, leaving no time to recover. Julie London's life was defined by talent, elegance, and a habit that slowly took everything from her. She began smoking at just 16, and over time it became a constant part of her daily routine. This wasn't casual use. Julie often smoked more than 3 packs a day. Year after year, that level of exposure placed continuous strain on her lungs, her heart, and her overall health. Like many long-term smokers, the effects built quietly. Her health gradually declined, and by 1995, she suffered a stroke, a clear warning that her body was no longer able to cope. From that point on, her condition remained fragile. She never fully recovered, and her strength continued to fade over the next several years. Then came another devastating diagnosis. In 1999, Julie London was diagnosed with lung cancer. By this stage, her body was too weak to handle aggressive treatment. The years of heavy smoking, combined with declining health, had left her with very few options. What might have been treatable earlier was now beyond control. On October 17, 2000, she was rushed to the hospital after struggling to breathe and experiencing severe choking. Just one day later, on October 18th, she passed away at the age of 74 due to cardiac arrest. The impact of her habits didn't stop with her health. It affected her career as well. Julie's once smooth, distinctive voice, the very thing that made her famous, was gradually damaged by years of smoking and drinking. Eventually, she was forced to step away from professional singing. Julie London's story shows how long-term smoking doesn't just shorten life, it slowly takes away health, strength, and even identity. What begins as a habit can quietly erode everything until the body can no longer keep up. Audrey Hepburn, an icon of grace, elegance, and quiet charm. But behind that polished image was a habit few people talk about. Audrey was a regular smoker, often consuming up to 3 packs a day, around 60 cigarettes. She began in her mid-teens, around 15 or 16, and what started as a coping mechanism for anxiety gradually became part of her daily life. Unlike the wild, rebellious image of some stars, Audrey's smoking felt controlled, almost refined. She used a long cigarette holder, choosing brands like Gold Flake and later Kent, giving the illusion of sophistication. But behind that elegance, the physical impact was no different. 60 cigarettes a day is not moderate, it's heavy use, placing her in the same range as many of the most extreme smokers on this list. To put it into perspective, Audrey's level was similar to figures like Sammy Davis Jr. or David Jansen, who also reached around 3 to 4 packs daily. It was slightly below the most extreme cases, like Marty Feldman, who pushed up to 5 packs a day, but still far beyond what the body can safely handle. Even compared to Julie London, who often exceeded 3 packs, Audrey's habit was right in that same dangerous range. What makes her case stand out is the contrast. While others showed visible signs of excess, Audrey maintained an image of calm and control. She smoked to manage stress, to steady her nerves, to stay composed in a demanding industry. But the body doesn't respond to image, it responds to exposure. Audrey Hepburn's story shows that smoking doesn't have to look reckless to be harmful. Whether it appears glamorous or chaotic, the long-term effect is the same. High daily intake, sustained over years, places immense pressure on the lungs and cardiovascular system. The damage builds quietly, regardless of how refined it may seem on the surface. Sammy Davis Jr., one of the most iconic entertainers of his time, faced a serious health crisis in August 1989. He began experiencing troubling symptoms, including a persistent tickle in his throat and a noticeable loss of taste. These early signs led to medical examinations, which revealed a malignant tumor in his throat. Davis was known to be a heavy smoker, often consuming up to 4 packs of cigarettes a day. This long-term habit had placed significant strain on his body and was closely linked to the development of his illness. As his condition became clear, doctors recommended a laryngectomy, the surgical removal of the larynx, as the best chance for survival. However, for Sammy Davis Jr., his voice was central to his identity and career. Instead of surgery, he chose radiation therapy in an effort to preserve his ability to speak and perform. At first, this approach offered some hope, but unfortunately, the cancer returned, more aggressive than before. As the disease progressed, the situation became unavoidable, and his larynx was eventually removed. Despite treatment, his health continued to decline due to complications related to throat cancer. After months of struggle, Sammy Davis Jr. passed away at his home in Beverly Hills on May 16, 1990, at the age of 64. His story shows the serious consequences of long-term heavy smoking. Consuming multiple packs of cigarettes daily over many years can significantly increase the risk of cancers affecting vital areas like the throat. In his case, the damage not only threatened his life but also took away the very voice that defined his legacy. Marty Feldman, known for his unique comedic style and unforgettable screen presence, was also a lifelong heavy smoker. Throughout his life, he maintained an extreme habit, reportedly consuming up to 5 packs of cigarettes a day. This level of smoking placed constant strain on his body, especially his heart and lungs, over many years. In December 1982, while working on the film Yellowbeard in Mexico City, Feldman's life came to a sudden end. He suffered a fatal heart attack in his hotel room at the age of 48. The film he was involved in at the time was later dedicated to his memory, marking the loss of a distinctive talent in the entertainment industry. Director Mel Brooks, who worked closely with Feldman on projects like Young Frankenstein, 1974, and Silent Movie, 1976, provided further insight into his lifestyle. According to Brooks, Feldman's smoking habit was constant. He could go through nearly half a carton of cigarettes a day. Alongside this, he consumed large amounts of black coffee, adding even more stress to his system. While the exact cause of his early death involved multiple factors, the combination of heavy smoking and excessive caffeine intake likely played a significant role in weakening his cardiovascular health. Years of high nicotine exposure can increase heart rate, raise blood pressure, and damage blood vessels. When combined with stimulants like caffeine, the strain on the heart becomes even greater. Marty Feldman's story highlights how extreme, long-term habits can accumulate into serious health risks. Patrick Swayze, best known for his roles in Dirty Dancing and Ghost, was not only a talented and charismatic actor, but also someone who quietly struggled with addiction. Behind his confident image and natural charm was a long battle with both heavy smoking and heavy drinking. His personality leaned toward intensity, and that same drive often pushed him into habits that were difficult to control. According to his friend and dance partner Nicky D'Amico, Swayze's lifestyle included constant use of cigarettes and alcohol. He was known to smoke around 60 cigarettes a day, roughly 3 packs. This level of smoking was not occasional, it was continuous, forming a central part of his daily routine. Despite his strong presence on screen and his physical abilities, this habit placed significant strain on his body over time. Swayze also dealt with deeper emotional challenges. He carried internal pressure, fear, and self-destructive tendencies that were not always visible to the public. Smoking became more than a habit. It was closely tied to how he managed stress and personal struggles. Over time, these behaviors reinforced each other, making it harder for him to break free from the cycle. Medical insight supported this connection. David Hoffman, his oncologist, pointed out the link between his smoking habit and patterns of self-sabotage. This suggests that his addiction was not only physical but also psychological, rooted in deeper issues that influenced his decisions. Patrick Swayze's story illustrates how addiction can exist even in highly successful individuals. His case shows that heavy smoking, especially when combined with other harmful habits, can gradually weaken the body while also reflecting underlying emotional struggles. Bette Davis, known as the Queen of the Warner Lot, was celebrated for her powerful acting and unforgettable screen presence. But alongside her talent was a habit that became impossible to ignore: heavy, constant smoking. Unlike many stars who only smoked on screen, Davis carried this habit into every part of her life, and over time, it left a visible mark on her appearance. She was known to smoke up to 4 packs of Vanguard cigarettes a day, sometimes even more. This wasn't occasional use, it was continuous. Davis openly admitted she couldn't go more than 10 minutes without lighting up. Cigarettes were always in her hand, whether she was on set, giving interviews, sitting in waiting rooms, or even in a dental chair. It became a defining part of her routine. While she didn't frequently smoke in her film roles or promote cigarette brands publicly, she often used cigarettes to shape her characters, adding intensity and realism to her performances. Off-screen, however, the effects were clear. Years of heavy smoking contributed to a weathered, aged appearance, far beyond her actual years. Her face, once sharp and expressive, gradually showed the toll of long-term exposure, making her one of the most noticeable examples of how smoking can accelerate physical aging. What makes her story even more striking is that, despite this extreme habit, she lived to the age of 81. She seemed to defy the odds, avoiding many of the most common smoking-related diseases. However, that does not mean the damage wasn't there. Her body still endured decades of strain, and her appearance reflected it clearly. In the end, Bette Davis passed away from breast cancer, not directly linked to smoking, yet reports indicate she continued smoking heavily, up to around 100 cigarettes a day, until the very end. Her story stands out as a powerful visual example of long-term smoking's impact. Even when it doesn't immediately lead to fatal disease, it can still alter the body, accelerate aging, and leave lasting effects that are impossible to hide. And that's the part Hollywood never shows you. On camera, a cigarette is a prop. Off camera, it's a contract, and the payment is your lungs, your voice, your time, and sometimes your life. Most people don't lose to one big mistake. They lose to one small habit repeated for years. A few puffs to calm stress. A few more to stay sharp. A few more because it's just who I am. Then one day, the body cashes the receipt, and there's no refund. So if you're watching this and you smoke, I'm not here to shame you. I'm here to wake you up. Because you still have the one thing Desi Arnaz and so many others ran out of, time to choose differently. Now I want to hear from you. And I want you to be honest. Comment quit if this video changed how you see smoking. Comment still fighting if you're trying to stop but it's hard. I'll reply with a simple plan to start. And if you know someone who thinks smoking is cool or harmless, share this video with them. One share can save one life. That's not drama, that's reality. So hit subscribe, turn on notifications, and like the video so YouTube knows to push this message to more people. Remember, movies have retakes. Life doesn't. The same cigarette that made them look powerful, confident, unforgettable, is the same one that slowly took everything away. Not overnight, not all at once, but day by day, breath by breath. These weren't just stars. They were icons people trusted, people admired, people copied. And that's the part no one talks about. Because what looked like style on screen was quietly turning into damage behind the scenes. Bigger names, heavier habits, and consequences you can't ignore. Stay with me. Because one of the most shocking stories on this list is not where you think it is. Rudolph Valentino, one of the biggest sex symbols of the 1920s, built an image that defined charm, mystery, and seduction. But like many stars of that era, cigarettes were closely tied to that image. They weren't just a habit, they were part of the persona. Valentino was often associated with a simple but powerful detail, a cigarette. Even something as small as holding an unlit Lucky Strike became a symbol of style and allure. On screen and in public, that image worked. The cigarette seemed to enhance his presence, adding to the sense of confidence and control that audiences admired. At the time, smoking was seen very differently. It represented sophistication, rebellion, even romance. For actors like Valentino, it became a visual tool, something that could instantly shape how a character was perceived. A cigarette in hand could suggest danger, charm, or quiet intensity without a single word. But behind that image was a reality that would only become clear years later. What looked elegant on screen carried real physical consequences off screen. Repeated exposure to tobacco smoke damages the lungs, reduces oxygen flow, and puts long-term stress on the body. The more it becomes part of daily life, the greater the risk. Valentino's case stands out because it shows how early Hollywood helped normalize smoking as something attractive. The habit wasn't just personal, it was cultural, reinforced by the industry itself. Audiences didn't just watch it, they adopted it. What started as a symbol of charm became a widespread behavior with lasting effects. And while Valentino helped define that image, the long-term reality of smoking would prove far less glamorous than it first appeared. Audrey Meadows, best known for The Honeymooners, is another clear example of how long-term smoking can lead to serious consequences. For many years, cigarettes were a constant part of her life, not just occasional use but a daily habit that slowly affected her health. In 1995, she received a devastating diagnosis: lung cancer. Doctors estimated she had about a year to live. Instead of choosing aggressive treatment, Audrey decided to focus on comfort, accepting palliative care, and spending her remaining time on her own terms. As her condition worsened, she slipped into a coma and passed away on February 3, 1996, at Cedars-Sinai Medical Center in Los Angeles. She was later laid to rest at Holy Cross Cemetery beside her second husband. However, one detail surrounding her legacy has raised questions. Her headstone lists her birth year as 1926, an inaccuracy that does not match verified records. This leads to an interesting discussion. Why would such an error exist for a well-known public figure? There are a few possible explanations. In Hollywood, age has always been a sensitive topic, especially for actresses. There is also the chance that the incorrect year was intentionally preserved, reflecting how she preferred to present herself publicly. Whatever the reason, it highlights how even basic facts about public figures can become blurred over time. Audrey Meadows' story is not just about her career or her health. It also shows how personal identity, public image, and historical records don't always align perfectly. What do you think? Was this just a mistake, or a deliberate choice tied to Hollywood's pressure on image. Nat King Cole, one of the greatest voices in music history, is remembered for his smooth, timeless sound. But behind that voice was a habit that went far beyond casual smoking. He was deeply dependent on cigarettes, especially menthols, and smoking became part of his daily routine. Before recording, he would often chain smoke multiple cigarettes in a row, believing it helped shape his signature deep tone. Over time, that routine turned into heavy consumption. While many reports mention 3 packs a day, the reality was even more extreme. Nat King Cole was known to go through 4 to 5 packs daily. This wasn't occasional use. He had a cigarette in his hand for most of his waking hours. From rehearsals to performances to quiet moments off stage, smoking was constant. At that level, the body is under continuous exposure to harmful chemicals, putting intense strain on the lungs and respiratory system. What makes his case striking is the connection between his talent and his habit. The very voice that made him famous was, in part, shaped by something that was also damaging his health. Long-term smoking at that intensity significantly increases the risk of serious illness, especially affecting the lungs and throat. His experience highlights how a habit can become so closely tied to a person's identity that it starts to feel essential, even when it's harmful. The reality is simple. Long-term heavy smoking doesn't just impact performance, it slowly causes lasting damage to the body that cannot be reversed. Johnny Carson, the face of late-night America, the man who turned The Tonight Show into a nightly ritual, was just as known for his sharp wit as he was for the cigarette often in his hand. During his years on air, smoking wasn't hidden. It was part of the show. He used cigarettes as props, lighting up between jokes, casually reinforcing an image that millions of viewers watched every night. At the time, smoking seemed normal. It was even considered fashionable. But as public perception of smoking began to change, so did perception of what really happened behind that seemingly harmless habit. In a candid 1979 interview with Mike Wallace on 60 Minutes, Carson spoke openly about his habit. No script, no jokes, just honesty. He admitted he felt guilty about how much he smoked, not once in a while, but compulsively. It had become something he couldn't easily control, and in true Carson fashion, he tried to laugh it off. He joked that quitting might take something extreme like electric shock therapy, or being forced to watch endless reruns of Gilligan's Island. The audience laughed. But behind the humor, the message was clear. This wasn't a simple habit anymore, it was dependence. Carson's case stands out because it captures a turning point. A time when smoking went from being part of entertainment culture to something people started questioning. Even someone as composed and in control as Johnny Carson recognized the hold it had on him. Addiction doesn't always look serious, it can seem normal, even entertaining. But over time, it becomes harder to control than you think. If you had to choose, would you want your icon, Johnny Carson, remembered with a cigarette in hand, or as someone people could look up to for a healthier life? Jackie Gleason, a larger-than-life personality, famous for his comedic brilliance and commanding presence, lived a lifestyle that matched his on-screen energy, big, excessive, and relentless. His daily routine wasn't just about work. It was built around indulgence. Massive meals, constant snacking, even consuming up to half a gallon of ice cream in a single sitting. But food was only part of the story. Gleason was also an extreme smoker, going through as many as 5 packs of cigarettes a day. That's not just heavy, that's one of the highest levels on this list. From morning to night, cigarettes were always within reach, becoming a constant companion alongside his love for Scotch whiskey. He even joked about it. In his typical bold style, Gleason once said, "Intimacy for a fat man is much ado about puffing," blending humor with a hint of truth about the toll his lifestyle was taking. But behind the jokes, the reality was clear: his body was under constant strain. Compared to others, Gleason's level of smoking placed him among the most extreme cases, similar to figures like Marty Feldman. 5 packs a day means continuous exposure to harmful toxins, leaving almost no time for the body to recover. Add heavy eating and drinking, and the pressure on the heart and lungs becomes even more intense. Jackie Gleason's life shows how excess, when left unchecked, builds over time. What starts as enjoyment turns into habit, and habit turns into damage. And at that level, the body doesn't forget, it keeps the score. Jerry Lewis, a multi-talented comedian, actor, and director, left a lasting legacy in entertainment. He lived a long life, passing away at 91 in Las Vegas, surrounded by family. But behind that longevity was a body that had endured years of serious strain. His official cause of death was heart failure, but the full picture was far more complex. Jerry Lewis suffered at least 3 documented heart attacks, along with other possible episodes that were never fully recorded. Over the years, he underwent multiple medical procedures, including stent placements, all pointing to a cardiovascular system under constant pressure. Smoking played a major role. Years of heavy use weakened his heart and lungs, especially combined with performing in smoke-filled environments. But it didn't stop there. His lifestyle included frequent alcohol consumption, an unbalanced diet, and reliance on painkillers. These factors added up, leading to conditions like diabetes, obesity, pulmonary fibrosis, and even prostate cancer. His body was fighting on multiple fronts at once. In the end, doctors suggested that reduced heart strength may have limited blood flow to the brain, contributing to his death. It wasn't one single cause, it was years of accumulated damage. Here's the reality: when smoking, alcohol, and poor eating habits come together, the damage multiplies, not adds up. Your heart takes the hit first, then everything else follows. Are your daily habits slowly building strength, or slowly breaking your body down? Because the truth is, the damage doesn't show right away. But when it does, it's often too late to fix. Take control early, eat better, cut back, and if you smoke, stop as soon as you can. Your future health depends on the choices you make today. Irene Ryan, best known as Granny from the Beverly Hillbillies, built a beloved image on screen, but off screen, she was known for one thing just as clearly: heavy, constant smoking. Among her castmates, she had a reputation as a true chain smoker, with cigarettes rarely out of reach, whether working or resting. That long-term habit became part of her daily life, quietly putting strain on her body over the years. Then, in March 1973, everything changed suddenly. While performing in Pippin, she collapsed on stage after what appeared to be a stroke. The performance stopped, and she was rushed back to California for treatment. Doctors later delivered a devastating diagnosis: an inoperable glioblastoma, an aggressive brain tumor. At that stage, there were very few options. Despite her determination to fight, her condition continued to worsen. On April 26, 1973, Irene Ryan passed away at the age of 70. The official causes included the brain tumor and arteriosclerotic heart disease, conditions often linked to long-term stress on the body, including years of smoking. Her case is another example of how damage can build quietly. Heavy smoking doesn't just affect the lungs, it impacts the heart, blood vessels, and overall system. Over time, these effects increase the risk of serious, life-threatening conditions. Irene Ryan was laid to rest at Woodlawn Memorial Cemetery in Santa Monica, beside her sister. Her legacy lives on through her performances, but her health story remains a reminder of how long-term habits can lead to sudden, irreversible outcomes. Buster Keaton, a legend of silent film, known for his fearless stunts and deadpan expression, brought endless energy to the screen. But behind that brilliance was a habit that followed him for years: heavy smoking. It wasn't hidden. On set, his constant coughing fits made it clear that his lungs were already under strain, even while he continued working at full pace. Despite these warning signs, the habit never stopped. Keaton kept smoking through the peak of his career and into his later years. Even during public appearances, like a trip to Toronto where he appeared on a Canadian quiz show, he still showed the same energy, but the damage was already there. Eventually, it caught up with him. In early 1966, Buster Keaton was diagnosed with lung cancer. By that point, his condition had become serious. Yet even as his health declined, he continued smoking, showing how strong the dependency had become. As the disease progressed, the impact became more visible. His breathing grew more difficult, his ability to speak weakened, and everyday movement became a challenge. Lung cancer doesn't just attack, it slowly takes away basic functions like breathing and talking. For Keaton, the final stage of his life became a struggle just to get air. On January 30th, 1966, Buster Keaton passed away. His death marked the end of a remarkable career but also highlighted the long-term effects of heavy smoking. His story is direct and clear. Years of smoking can lead to irreversible damage, especially to the lungs. The warning signs may appear early, like coughing and breathing issues, but ignoring them allows the damage to continue until it becomes life-threatening. Don't ignore the warning signs your body is giving you. Catch it early, make changes early, and give yourself a better chance at a healthier life. Dean Martin, a legendary entertainer known for his smooth voice and effortless charm, defined an era of music and nightlife. His deep, husky tone became his signature, and for many, it sounded timeless. But that voice didn't come without a cost. Years of heavy smoking played a major role in shaping it, turning cigarettes into a constant part of his life from a young age, likely starting around 16. For Dean, smoking wasn't occasional, it was routine. On stage, off stage, during performances or downtime, cigarettes were always within reach. At the time, it seemed to fit the image, relaxed, confident, untouchable. But behind that image, the damage was building quietly. As the years passed, the effects became harder to ignore. His health began to decline, not from one single issue, but from multiple serious conditions. In 1991, he received a devastating diagnosis. But that was only part of the problem. He was also battling lung cancer, emphysema, and Alzheimer's disease, all discovered around the same period. These are not minor conditions. Long-term smoking significantly increases the risk of lung cancer and emphysema, both of which directly affect breathing and oxygen flow. Over time, the lungs lose their ability to function properly, making even simple tasks exhausting. The body weakens, and recovery becomes harder. Dean eventually managed to quit smoking, but by then, the damage had already taken hold. His daily life became increasingly difficult as his health declined. The combination of multiple illnesses placed overwhelming strain on his body, making normal activity a challenge. In 1995, at the age of 78, Dean Martin passed away. His legacy as a performer remains strong, but his health story shows a clear pattern. Years of heavy smoking don't just affect appearance or voice, they lead to serious, often overlapping diseases that can take control of the body. His life is a reminder that what seems like part of the image can become the very thing that breaks it down over time. Frank Sinatra, the voice, the swagger. The man who could hold a microphone in one hand and a glass of Jack Daniels in the other like it was second nature. His raspy tone carried emotion, experience, and the weight of years of heavy smoking. That signature voice, loved by millions, was shaped in part by a habit he never let go of. Sinatra was known to smoke heavily, often going through around 2 packs a day. Cigarettes weren't just a routine, they were part of his image. Paired with alcohol, it created a lifestyle that looked effortless on the surface but placed constant strain on his body. Night after night, performance after performance, the damage continued quietly in the background. At the time, it felt like style. A cigarette, a drink, a voice that could fill a room. It became the definition of cool. But the reality was different. Long-term smoking reduces lung function, damages blood vessels, and increases the risk of serious diseases. Combined with alcohol, the effects become even more severe, putting pressure on both the heart and the respiratory system. Even in death, that image remained. At his funeral, his children placed a bottle of Jack Daniels, a pack of Camel cigarettes, and a Zippo lighter in his pockets, symbols of a life lived fully, but also a reminder of habits that never left him. Frank Sinatra's story closes this list for a reason. It shows how something that looks iconic can carry hidden consequences. Smoking and excessive drinking don't just shape an image, they shape the body over time, often in ways that can't be reversed. Out of all the names in this video, whose story hit you the hardest? Which loss feels the most tragic? More importantly, what can we learn from this? Smoking damages the lungs, weakens the heart, and increases the risk of life-threatening disease. The solution is clear. Reduce exposure, quit early, and avoid turning a habit into dependence. Because once the damage builds up, it becomes much harder to undo. Let us know your thoughts in the comments and take it seriously. Your health is something you can still protect, starting today. 10. Icons. 10 lives. One habit they thought they controlled. For years, it looked harmless. A cigarette in the hand, a drink on the table, a quiet moment on stage, and the world called it style. But time does not care about image, and the body always keeps the record. What makes this hard is not just how it ended, it is how normal it felt while it was happening. None of them started thinking, this is how my story ends. It was just one more cigarette, one more night, one more time saying I will stop later. And later never came. So let me ask you something. Honestly, if you could see your future clearly, would you still make the same choices you are making today? Which story stayed with you the most? And which one hit a little too close to home? Tell me in the comments. I read every single one. And if you are watching this alone tonight, take a second. Breathe. Your story is still being written. Take care of yourself. I will see you in part 3. They didn't just smoke. They couldn't stop. Welcome back. This is part 4. We've already seen how deep this habit runs, and we're still not at the end yet. Old Hollywood wasn't just glamour and fame. It was routines that followed these stars everywhere, even when the cameras stopped rolling. And cigarettes? They were always part of the picture. This chapter goes further, bigger names, heavier habits, and stories that hit a little closer. And remember, we're not done until part 5. Let's get into it. Raul Julia. Cigars have been part of his life since his college days, starting around the age of 20. Back then, he was mainly a cigarette smoker, but over time, he made the shift to cigars. It wasn't just a change in habit, it became a routine he genuinely enjoyed. In later years, Julia typically smoked 1 to 2 cigars a day, often after dinner, treating it as a moment to unwind. His preferences were clear. He favored the Cuban Punch Double Corona, though he also enjoyed cigars from the Dominican Republic, including La Gloria Cubana in Miami. That choice even carried over into his work. While portraying Gomez in The Addams Family, Julia leaned into that same cigar smoking style, giving the character an added sense of charm and confidence. Off-screen, the habit stayed with him. Whether relaxing or even out on the golf course, a lit cigar was rarely far away. And in true Raul Julia fashion, he had a sense of humor about it. He once joked, "Why pay $100 for a therapy session when you can spend $25 on a cigar? Whatever it is will come back. So what? Smoke another one." It was said with a laugh, his deep baritone voice making the line feel almost musical. He didn't stop there. Julia also quipped, "A cigar a day keeps the doctor away," and reflected more personally, saying, "A cigar is as good as the memories you have when you smoked it." For him, cigars weren't just a habit. They were tied to moments, routines, and a certain way of living. At first glance, it all feels relaxed, even charming. But when something becomes part of your daily rhythm, it stays with you longer than you think. What begins as a small ritual can quietly turn into a lasting pattern, one that follows you through years, through roles, and through life itself. Barbara Stanwyck. Her life was shaped by independence from a very young age, and along the way, she picked up a habit that stayed with her for decades: smoking. She began at just 9 years old, long before the risks were widely understood, and didn't give it up until only 4 years before her passing. By then, it had already been part of her life for most of her journey. Raised by her sister, a showgirl, Stanwyck had to grow up fast. Stability came early, and so did responsibility. She left school at 15 and stepped into the entertainment world, starting as a chorus girl. That path quickly evolved. By 1926, she made her Broadway debut and took on the name Barbara Stanwyck, a name that would become one of the most respected in Hollywood. Her career was strong, steady, and defined by discipline. But behind that success, the long-term effects of smoking continued to build. Over the years, the strain on her lungs and heart became more serious, even if it wasn't always visible on the surface. On January 20th, 1990, at the age of 82, Barbara Stanwyck passed away. The causes were congestive heart failure and chronic obstructive pulmonary disease, conditions often linked to long-term stress on the body, including years of smoking. She had made her wishes clear: no funeral service. Instead, her remains were cremated, and her ashes were scattered over Lone Pine, California, a place closely connected to her work in Western films. Barbara Stanwyck's life tells a story of strength, discipline, and early independence, but it also reflects how habits formed young can stay with a person for a lifetime, quietly shaping the final outcome in ways that only become clear much later. Lucille Ball, the unstoppable force behind one of television's most iconic legacies, left a mark that still stands today. But alongside her talent and sharp comedic timing was a habit she never hid: smoking. She was a lifelong smoker, and unlike many others, she didn't distance herself from it. In fact, she openly appeared in cigarette advertising, becoming closely tied to that image during her career. Her preference, however, was clear. Lucille Ball was loyal to Chesterfield's, not Philip Morris, the brand officially associated with her show. And that created a problem early on. During production, she was caught smoking her preferred cigarettes, which led to a clash with a strict Philip Morris representative who insisted she could not publicly display a competing brand. But Lucille Ball wasn't one to back down easily. Instead of giving up her habit or her preference, she found a workaround. She simply placed her Chesterfields inside a Philip Morris tin box. On the outside, everything looked compliant. But in reality, she was still smoking exactly what she wanted. A quiet act of defiance, handled with the same cleverness she brought to her performances. Smoking wasn't just something she did, it was part of her daily rhythm. Whether on set or off, it followed her through the years, just like many habits that become deeply ingrained over time. Her story stands out not just because of the habit itself, but because of how she managed it: direct, unapologetic, and a step ahead of the rules. It shows how something so routine can become part of both a public image and a personal identity, carried through a lifetime without ever really stepping away from it. Burgess Meredith, known for his wide range of roles and that unmistakable voice, had a long, complicated relationship with smoking. At one point in his life, he was a heavy smoker, the kind that doesn't just fade into the background. It became part of his routine, something he carried with him day after day. Then came a moment that changed everything. Meredith once described a vivid nightmare where he was trapped inside a burning building, caused by his own cigarettes catching fire. The fear felt real enough to shake him. That experience pushed him to step away from smoking completely, and for years, he stayed away from it. During his time on the 1966 TV series Batman, Meredith took on the role of the Penguin, a character known for constantly holding and smoking through a cigarette holder. There was just one problem. Meredith had already quit smoking for over 20 years. Suddenly, he found himself back in a situation where smoking was required for the role. The smoke made him cough during takes, interrupting scenes, and making filming difficult. Instead of letting that stop him, Meredith came up with a solution. He created the Penguin's signature grunting laugh, a strange, almost awkward sound that masked his coughing fits. As he once joked, "It was a pretty funny noise for a penguin to make. I sounded more like a duck." That small adjustment became one of the character's most memorable traits. Once the series ended, Meredith didn't hesitate. He quit smoking again, returning to the decision he had made years earlier. His story stands out because it's not just about habit, but about control. Walking away, coming back for a role, then stepping away again. It shows how deeply something can be tied to both life and work. Having to go back to smoking just to get into character. Would you consider that a real sacrifice for art? His determination is truly admirable and something we should learn from. Marlene Dietrich, her distinctive style and unmistakable elegance, made her one of the most captivating figures of her time. Everything about her presence felt deliberate, refined, and the cigarette in her hand was no exception. On screen and off, smoking became part of her identity. It wasn't just a habit, it was a statement. In films like Morocco and Destry Rides Again, Dietrich's image was often framed with a cigarette between her fingers. The way she held it, the slow inhale, the thick curls of smoke rising against the light, it all added to the aura. Dark lipstick, steady gaze, controlled movements. She turned smoking into something that looked powerful, even mesmerizing. Behind that image, though, the habit was constant. Dietrich was known to smoke heavily, reportedly going through up to 50 cigarettes a day. That's not occasional, it's continuous. From one moment to the next, cigarettes were part of her rhythm, shaping not just how she appeared, but how she lived day to day. At the time, smoking carried a very different meaning. It was linked to sophistication, independence, even seduction. For stars like Dietrich, it became a visual language, something audiences connected with confidence and control, and she mastered it. But perspective changes. What once looked glamorous is now seen differently. The same image that defined elegance also came with a reality people understand much more clearly today. Marlene Dietrich's image may remain iconic, but her smoking habit shows how easily something harmful can be mistaken for something desirable. What people once admired, we now recognize as a risk, one that affects health in ways that cannot be ignored. Vivien Leigh's ascent to the role of Scarlett O'Hara in Gone with the Wind is one of Hollywood's most legendary stories. Surrounded by strong contenders like Bette Davis and Joan Crawford, she emerged as the final choice, and from that moment on, the pressure never let up. This wasn't just another role. It demanded everything. Leigh worked under intense conditions, often putting in 16-hour days, 6 days a week, for a total of 125 days. The schedule was relentless. Behind the polished performance on screen were moments of real exhaustion. Candid photos from the set show a woman physically drained, carrying the emotional and mental weight of every scene she performed. To cope with that level of stress, Leigh turned to cigarettes. Not casually, but constantly. Smoking became part of her routine, something she relied on between takes, during breaks, and even in the middle of long shooting days. At her peak, she was reported to smoke up to 4 packs a day. That's continuous exposure, with little time in between for the body to recover. At the time, this kind of habit wasn't unusual in Hollywood. Long hours, pressure, and expectations pushed many actors towards similar routines. But that doesn't make the impact any less real. The body doesn't adjust to that level of intake. It absorbs it, slowly and steadily. What makes Leigh's case stand out is the intensity of both sides. On one hand, unmatched dedication to her craft. On the other, a habit that grew alongside that pressure, becoming part of how she managed it. Her performance became iconic, but behind that success was a reality that didn't show on screen, one where stress and routine combined in ways that stayed with her far beyond the role itself. Charles Lane was an American actor who lived to be 100 years old, with a career that stretched an incredible 76 years. A reliable and talented performer, he appeared in hundreds of film and television roles, often cast as the same unforgettable type: grumpy office workers, strict doctors, stern judges, and difficult middle managers. His sharp features and no-nonsense delivery made him perfect for those roles, and audiences came to recognize him instantly, even if they didn't always know his name. In many ways, Lane stood apart from the usual Hollywood lifestyle. He avoided alcohol entirely, remaining a lifelong teetotaler despite the industry around him. But when it came to smoking, his attitude was very different. For nearly 70 years, he smoked about a pack of cigarettes a day, steady, consistent, and uninterrupted. It became part of his routine, something that followed him through decades of work and life. Lane was not unaware of the risks. He openly acknowledged that smoking had taken countless lives, yet he believed he might be the exception. "I must be the exception," he once remarked, reflecting a mindset that allowed the habit to continue despite the known dangers. It wasn't until breathing itself became difficult that the reality set in. During his final hospitalization in 1990, Lane faced that moment directly. When asked if he still smoked, his answer was clear and immediate. He had quit just 45 minutes earlier. After 70 years, the habit ended in less than an hour. That detail says everything. A lifetime of routine stopped at the very last moment, and in that moment, his story closed. Not with drama, but with a quiet, smoke-free decision that came just a little too late. Oscar Levant, a lifelong heavy smoker and frequent user of pharmaceutical drugs, lived a fast, restless life that rarely slowed down. Born in 1906 in Pittsburgh to Russian Jewish immigrants, he showed exceptional talent at the piano from an early age. At the same time, he was known to be difficult to discipline, a sharp mind that didn't easily fit into structure. As he grew older, that intensity never faded. Levant became known not just for his musical ability, but for the way he lived, always doing something, often several things at once. Long before the word multitasking became popular, he was already living it. Photos often captured him sitting at the piano, playing complex classical pieces while chain-smoking cigarettes, drinking cup after cup of coffee, flipping through scripts, and even writing letters, all at the same time. Smoking wasn't just part of his routine, it was constant. One cigarette after another, rarely a pause. Combined with heavy caffeine use and long-term reliance on medication, his lifestyle placed continuous pressure on his body. There was no real downtime, no real break. Despite his talent and productivity, that pace came with a cost. Years of strain, both physical and mental, slowly built up. The body can only keep up for so long under that kind of pressure. In 1972, at the age of 65, Oscar Levant passed away from a heart attack. It wasn't a sudden shift in direction, it was the result of a life lived at full speed, with habits that never gave his body a chance to recover. His story stands out for its intensity, talent, energy, and constant motion, but also a reminder that even the most active mind still depends on a body that needs limits. Suzanne Pleshette, an actress remembered for her calm presence and distinctive voice, lived a life shaped by both professional success and personal struggles. Her connection to smoking was not subtle. It showed up in everyday moments, even in something as simple as the packs of cigarettes often seen on her vanity. This wasn't occasional, it was a steady, long-term habit that stayed with her for years. Pleshette built a respected career, known for her elegance and composed style on screen. Yet off-screen, there were signs that life wasn't always as smooth. At times, she appeared with physical marks that led to rumors of domestic issues, though she remained private about her personal life. Her reserved nature only added to the mystery surrounding her, making her both admired and distant in the eyes of the public. Like many figures of her era, smoking was part of her routine. It blended into daily life, rarely questioned at the time. But over the years, the impact became clear. In 2006, Suzanne Pleshette was diagnosed with lung cancer. It was a serious turning point. Treatment required the removal of part of her lung, a major step that showed how far the condition had progressed. For a time, she declared recovery. It seemed like a moment of relief, a chance to move forward. But the effects of long-term smoking don't disappear easily. Despite her fight, her health continued to decline. In 2008, Suzanne Pleshette passed away. Her story reflects a pattern seen in many lives, where a long-standing habit quietly builds over time, only becoming fully visible when it reaches a critical stage. She remains remembered for her work, but her life also shows something much more direct. Years of smoking played a central role in what happened to her health. What started as a daily habit slowly led to serious damage, ending in lung cancer and major surgery. Kathleen Turner, truly a force to be reckoned with, stands as an embodiment of boldness. She has always been unapologetically herself, openly drinking, smoking, and speaking her mind without hesitation. Her intelligence is evident in the way she carries herself, and she has never shied away from discussing her personal life with honesty, including her views on intimacy and relationships. Even after a decade of being single following her divorce from property developer Jay Weiss, with whom she shares a daughter, Rachel Ann, Turner continued to project confidence and independence. She has often expressed that, to her, intimacy is a reflection of health and vitality, but at the same time, she values relationships that go beyond the physical. Turner has pointed out that younger men often lack the depth and life experience needed to truly engage her. A brief relationship with a man in his late 30s reinforced that belief, showing her the importance of connection, depth, and intrigue over surface-level attraction. Throughout it all, her personality remained consistent, direct, thoughtful, and unfiltered. Whether on screen or in interviews, she embraced who she was. As she once put it, she enjoys working in live television, and appreciates being able to use her natural speaking voice, something that reflects her commitment to authenticity in both her work and her life. And that voice, deep, raspy, unmistakable, didn't just define her presence, it also reflected years of smoking that stayed with her over time. Cigarettes were part of her lifestyle, something she never really hid or softened. Like many habits that feel natural in the moment, it became part of her daily rhythm, shaping not just her image, but quietly leaving its mark in the background as the years went on. And there it is, another chapter of legends, and the habit that stayed beside them like a shadow. Here's the real value to take with you. In every story today, the pattern is the same. A small, harmless routine becomes a lifelong cost. Not overnight, but quietly, year after year. So let me ask you this, which name hit you the hardest? And why? Drop it in the comments. I actually read them, and I used them to shape part 5. If this episode gave you something real to think about, tap like. It helps this series reach more people. And subscribe plus turn on the bell, because part 5 is next, and it goes even deeper than this. Take care of yourself, stay sharp, and I'll see you in part 5. They didn't just smoke, they lived inside the cigarette. Hollywood sold you glamour, but behind the camera, some of its biggest stars were burning themselves down, one drag at a time. And this isn't a fun facts list. These are habits that turned into obsessions, then into endings. Stay sharp, because the last name on this list isn't who people expect. And when you hear what they did every single day, you'll understand why some legends didn't make it to old age. Let's get into the worst smokers in Hollywood history. John Cazale, an actor whose career showed extraordinary promise, was tragically cut short by lung cancer. In 1977, he received the diagnosis, and behind it was a long history of chain smoking that likely played a major role in the development of the disease. What followed was not a slow decline over decades, but a rapid and unforgiving progression. Despite undergoing multiple treatments, his condition worsened quickly. The cancer didn't remain contained, it spread to his bones, making recovery far more difficult. Within a short period, his health deteriorated to a critical point. On March 13, 1978, at just 42 years old, John Cazale passed away. What makes his story especially striking is the level of talent he carried. Cazale was not just another actor, he had a rare ability to deliver emotion with subtlety. His performances were natural, grounded, and deeply human. He didn't rely on exaggerated expression. Instead, he communicated through small gestures, through his eyes, through silence. Every role he took on felt real. Those who worked with him recognized that potential. He was seen as someone who could have gone much further, someone capable of becoming a lasting figure in the industry. But that path was cut short. His case stands out not because of how long it took, but how fast it happened. Years of habit, followed by a sudden and aggressive outcome. There was no long window to reverse it, no extended time to step back. John Cazale's life leaves behind a clear contrast, remarkable talent on one side, and a habit that quietly built its impact on the other. And when the two finally collided, the result came far sooner than anyone expected. Lana Turner, her life was anything but simple. Behind the glamour and fame was a series of personal struggles, difficult relationships, and marriages that often ended in turmoil. But beyond those challenges, there were two habits that stayed constant in her life: heavy drinking and smoking. Over time, both became deeply rooted, shaping not just her lifestyle, but ultimately her health. Smoking, in particular, was a steady presence. It wasn't something occasional, it was frequent, visible, and hard to separate from her daily routine. In fact, her use of cigarettes was so noticeable that in many official photographs, they were deliberately airbrushed out. The image the public saw was carefully controlled, but the habit itself remained. As the years passed, the combination of alcoholism and constant smoking began to take a serious toll. The body can only handle so much, and in Turner's case, the impact became clear. In 1992, she was diagnosed with throat cancer, a direct and devastating consequence of long-term exposure to both alcohol and tobacco. What followed was not easy. She endured 8 intense weeks of radiation therapy to treat a malignant tumor. The process was painful, physically exhausting, and emotionally draining. It marked a difficult chapter in a life already filled with challenges. Even before the diagnosis, there were signs, subtle changes, strain on her voice, the kind of signals that often go unnoticed or ignored. But once the condition reached that stage, there was no easy way back. Lana Turner's story reflects how long-term habits can quietly build into something serious. Not overnight, not all at once, but steadily, until the consequences can no longer be hidden, even behind the most carefully managed image. Amanda Blake, for 3 decades, she maintained a heavy smoking habit, going through 2 to 3 packs of cigarettes a day. It wasn't occasional, it was constant. And over time, that habit became a defining part of her life story in ways she likely never expected. On August 16, 1989, at the age of 60, Amanda Blake passed away at Mercy General Hospital in Sacramento. But what led to that moment was a long and difficult path. Early reports suggested she had died after a prolonged battle with oral cancer, a disease closely linked to years of heavy smoking. Her struggle began much earlier. In 1977, Blake underwent surgery for oral cancer, a direct consequence of her cigarette use. It was a serious turning point. Facing that reality changed her direction. After surgery, she dedicated herself to raising awareness, traveling across the country to speak on behalf of the American Cancer Society. In one emotional testimony before a House subcommittee, she described herself as a victim of oral cancer, openly connecting her condition to smoking. She spoke candidly about how different things might have been if cigarette warnings had been clearer or stronger when she first started. In her own words, she believed she might never have taken that first step. What makes her story stand out is that it didn't end with silence. She chose to speak, to share, and to warn others based on her own experience. Amanda Blake's life shows a full circle: years of habit, the consequences that followed, and then a final effort to make sure others understood the risks before it was too late. William Tallman, his relationship with cigarettes began early, at just 12 years old, and continued for most of his life. Even as public awareness about the dangers of smoking grew stronger, his habit didn't stop. At times, he was known to smoke up to 3 packs a day, a level that placed constant strain on his body, day after day, year after year. Tallman built a respected career in Hollywood, but what set him apart came much later, under very different circumstances. After being diagnosed with lung cancer, he was faced with a reality he could not reverse. The illness had already progressed, and he knew his time was limited. What he chose to do next made his story unforgettable. Despite being terminally ill, Tallman agreed to film a public service announcement for the American Cancer Society, becoming the first Hollywood actor to take part in an anti-smoking campaign of that kind. It wasn't a typical performance. It was personal. The message began with a line that stayed with many who heard it. "Before I die, I want to do what I can to leave a world free of cancer for my 6 children." It wasn't scripted for drama, it reflected his reality. He requested that the commercial be broadcast only after his death, turning it into a final statement rather than a public appearance. In that moment, the image changed. Not an actor delivering lines, but a man speaking from experience, knowing exactly what the consequences had been. William Tallman's story carries a different kind of weight. It doesn't end with the habit, it ends with a warning, delivered at the very moment when there was nothing left to ignore. Walt Disney, one of the most influential figures in entertainment history, also carried a habit that followed him for much of his life: smoking. After World War I, he developed a heavy dependence on cigarettes, something clearly visible in many photographs from that time. In image after image, a cigarette was rarely far from his hand, becoming a quiet but constant presence alongside his work. As the years went on, that habit didn't fade, it stayed. Despite the growing awareness of health risks, smoking remained part of his daily routine. And like many long-term habits, the impact didn't show all at once. It built over time. Tragically, Walt Disney's life was cut short by lung cancer, a condition strongly linked to years of heavy smoking. His passing marked the loss of a visionary mind, someone who had shaped an entire industry. But alongside that legacy was a reality that couldn't be ignored. Interestingly, in the years after his death, efforts were made to reshape how that part of his life was remembered. The Walt Disney Company attempted to minimize his association with smoking, though not entirely successfully. Reports revealed that in certain displays, particularly at Disneyland and attractions like Walt Disney Presents, images of Walt were digitally altered to remove cigarettes from his hands. Visitors started to notice. Details that once appeared in so many original photos were suddenly gone. It makes you wonder how much of history is being preserved and how much is being quietly edited out. Walt Disney's legacy is undeniable. A visionary creator whose work still shapes the world today. But his personal habits were part of that life too, something that time, and even careful editing, can't fully erase. So when you hear Walt Disney, what comes to mind? The genius behind animation and storytelling? Or the man behind the image, with habits rarely talked about? Keith Richards, let's be honest, you can almost guess when it started. Around 17 sounds about right. If that's the case, then we're looking at decades of smoking, close to 50 years or more. Now, think about the numbers. If he averaged 2 packs a day, that's roughly 40 cigarettes daily. Over time, that adds up to more than 700,000 cigarettes. Not a phase, a lifetime pattern. For years, smoking was just part of the image alongside the music, the attitude, the lifestyle. It followed him through tours, recordings, and everything in between. Like many long-term habits, it became routine, something that didn't feel unusual anymore. But here's where it shifts. Keith Richards is now officially a non-smoker. In an interview with CBS, he revealed he quit cigarettes after 55 years of the habit. That's not a small change, that's breaking something built over decades. And it didn't happen in isolation. Over the years, Richards gradually stepped away from other habits too. He quit heroin back in 1978, stopped using cocaine in 2006, and later reduced his alcohol intake to occasional drinks. By 2018, he described a much more controlled lifestyle. When it came to smoking, he used nicotine patches to help him quit. And the difference? He noticed it. Better stamina, more energy, clear changes he could feel. What stands out here isn't just how long the habit lasted, but that it eventually stopped. After everything, after all those years, he still made the shift. That raises a simple question: if someone can walk away after decades, what's really stopping most people from doing it sooner? I'm honestly proud of him, and I believe anyone can quit if they truly want it. George Formby had a life full of quirks, but one detail always stood out: his bond with his dog, Willie. In many ways, it seemed even stronger than his relationship with his wife. That alone says a lot about the kind of man he was. But behind the humor and charm was a routine that never really slowed down. After suffering a heart attack in 1949, Formby was advised to take things easy. Most people would have taken that seriously. He didn't. Instead, he continued smoking heavily, around 40 Capstan full-strength and Woodbine cigarettes a day. And in typical Formby fashion, he even joked about it, calling them his coffin nails. It sounded funny, but the meaning behind it was anything but. Smoking wasn't his only indulgence. He also had a strong liking for rich foods, especially beef dripping on toast. Combined with his cigarette habit, it created a lifestyle that kept putting pressure on his body from multiple directions. Over time, the effects became harder to ignore. His health began to decline. He developed a gastric ulcer, and breathing became more difficult, both issues closely linked to long-term smoking and overall strain on the body. These weren't isolated problems. They were part of a bigger picture. When doctors took a closer look, the list of concerns grew. High blood pressure, obesity, and heart problems all showing up together. It was clear that years of habit had built into something much more serious. Formby's story carries that strange mix of humor and reality, laughing about coffin nails while the consequences slowly catch up in the background. So ask yourself, if heavy smoking and high-fat eating keep going like this, how long before the worst shows up? Maybe it's time to cut back, or better yet, quit smoking and start taking control of what you eat before it's too late. Tallulah Bankhead, she lived at a pace most people couldn't even keep up with. Her energy was intense, almost overwhelming, and everything about her lifestyle matched that same level. Nothing was moderate. Nothing was held back. Her smoking habit alone was extreme, more than 100 cigarettes a day. Not occasionally. Not during certain moments, this was constant. One after another, from morning to night. At the same time, alcohol wasn't treated as a luxury. Gin and bourbon were part of her daily routine, as common as water for most people. To keep up with that lifestyle, she relied on a suitcase filled with medications used to help her sleep, stay awake, and simply function from one day to the next. It wasn't just about indulgence, it was about maintaining a rhythm that pushed her body to its limits. Her personal life was just as intense. Known for numerous relationships with both men and women, she lived openly, without concern for expectations. Her sharp wit, bold language, and unpredictable behavior made her impossible to ignore. There were moments when her actions, like suddenly disrobing, left people around her shocked and unsettled. But behind all that energy and boldness was a pattern that never slowed down. Smoking, drinking, constant stimulation, it all ran together, day after day. At that level, there's no real pause, no recovery time. Tallulah Bankhead's life didn't follow balance, it followed momentum. Fast, relentless, and unapologetic. And when everything runs at that speed for too long, the body eventually has to respond, whether you're ready for it or not. Michael Landon, best known for his role as Little Joe Cartwright on the beloved Western series Bonanza, built an image on screen that audiences trusted and admired. But off-screen, there was a habit that followed him closely, one that never really left during those years. During the run of Bonanza, Landon developed a serious smoking addiction. This wasn't occasional, it escalated quickly. By 1961, he was reportedly smoking up to 4 packs of unfiltered cigarettes a day. That's an intense level, and it didn't go unnoticed. In fact, crew members on set gave him a nickname, Socks. Not for style, but because the smell of cigarette smoke had seeped so deeply into his clothes that even his socks carried it. That detail says everything about how constant the habit was. It wasn't just something he did between scenes, it was always there, woven into his daily routine. For years, the pattern continued. Smoking became part of the rhythm of his life, something that stayed consistent even as his career moved forward. Eventually, Landon made a change. In 1989, after decades of smoking, he quit. It was a major shift after such a long period of dependence. But by then, the body had already carried the effects of that habit for many years. In 1991, just 2 years after quitting, Michael Landon passed away from pancreatic cancer. The timing was striking. After finally stepping away from the habit, the outcome came soon after. His story highlights something many people overlook. It's not just about quitting, it's about how long the habit has been there before the change happens. Michael Landon's life holds that contrast. A strong, admired presence on screen, and a private routine that quietly followed him for years, leaving its mark long after it ended. Gordon Lightfoot, in addition to his remarkable musical career, faced serious health challenges that followed him for years. Among them was emphysema, a condition closely tied to long-term smoking. His habit began early, around the age of 15, when he was singing in barbershop quartets. What started young didn't fade, it stayed, growing into a routine that followed him through decades of performing, recording, and life on the road. For many years, smoking was simply part of the background. Like a lot of artists of his era, it blended into the lifestyle: long hours, late nights, constant movement. But over time, the effects became more visible. Breathing issues, reduced stamina, things that slowly changed how the body responded. In late 2018, Lightfoot made a firm decision to quit smoking. It wasn't just about his own condition. His mother, who had also been a heavy smoker, passed away in 1998 from related complications. That loss stayed with him. On top of that, he made a personal pact with his youngest son, Miles, an agreement to walk away from cigarettes. Even when his son later stepped back from that agreement, Lightfoot didn't. He held on to it. That says a lot about his mindset at that stage of life. After years of habit, he chose to stop, and more importantly, he stayed stopped. Interestingly, while he gave up cigarettes, he still kept a sense of humor about his lifestyle. He mentioned continuing with legal cannabis, even joking about switching to edibles. It showed that even as he made serious changes, he remained grounded in his personality. But the years before that decision had already left their mark. Long-term habits don't simply disappear, they leave a trace that stays with the body. On May 1st, 2023, Gordon Lightfoot passed away. His legacy in music remains strong, but his life also reflects something deeper: how early habits can follow you for decades, and how even late decisions to change still carry meaning. His story doesn't end with the habit, it ends with the effort to step away from it, even after a lifetime of living with it. So what's the real story here? It's not smoking is bad. You already know that. The real story is this: fame doesn't protect your lungs. Money doesn't buy back time. And the spotlight can't hide what your body is quietly losing. Day after day. A cigarette looks small. It feels harmless. It's just one. And that's exactly how it wins. Because addiction doesn't show up as a monster. It shows up as a routine. A break. A reward. A calm me down. A help me focus. I'll quit later. And later becomes never. Some of these stars had everything people chase: beauty, power, status, a name the world remembers. But they also had a habit they couldn't control. And what's terrifying is how normal it looked from the outside. So here's the takeaway: simple, brutal, and true. If something is stealing your health quietly, it's not a habit, it's a debt. If you keep paying it daily, the interest will destroy you. And when the bill comes, you don't get to negotiate. If you're watching this and you smoke, don't romanticize it. Don't lie to yourself. If you don't smoke, don't start. Not for stress, not for style, not for "I'm different." Because the people on this list were different too, and still the same ending waited. If this video hit you, comment one word: later. Because later is where most people lose their life, one excuse at a time. And if you want more stories like this, raw, real, no sugarcoating, subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one. Back again. And yeah, it gets worse. Old Hollywood didn't just sell glamour. It sold cigarettes like they were part of the script. From smooth-talking stars to silver screen legends, some of the biggest names couldn't put them down, even when it started costing them everything. This is part 3 of the worst smokers in Hollywood history. Bigger icons, heavier habits, and stories that hit a little harder. Let's jump in. Al Lewis, better known as Grandpa Munster, wasn't just a familiar face on television. He lived a life that felt almost like a script itself. Before stepping into the spotlight, he worked in the circus in the late 1920s, then took a completely different path, earning a PhD in child psychology from Columbia University. That mix of street experience and academic depth gave him a personality that stood out in early television. By the 1950s, as TV began to boom, Lewis found his place. He appeared on multiple live shows in New York and later became widely recognized for roles like Officer Leo Schnauzer in Car 54, Where Are You? But it was his role as Grandpa in The Munsters that made him unforgettable. Alongside that image was a constant habit: cheap cigars. Smoking wasn't just occasional for him. It was part of his everyday life, something he carried both on screen and off. Compared to cigarette smokers on this list, cigars might seem less frequent, but the exposure to smoke and toxins was still significant over time. Al Lewis passed away on February 3, 2006, from natural causes. But even in death, his personality showed through. After being cremated, his ashes were reportedly placed inside his favorite cigar box, a final detail that reflected exactly who he was. His story feels different from the others. Not dramatic, not sudden, but steady. A life full of turns, contradictions, and habits that never really left him. It's a reminder that sometimes the things we treat as small, everyday routines quietly become part of how we're remembered in the end. Moe Howard, one of the driving forces behind the legendary Three Stooges, was known for his sharp comedic timing and unforgettable screen presence. Off-screen, his life was deeply connected to entertainment history, even through family ties. His wife, Helen Schoenberger, was a cousin of the famous magician Harry Houdini, linking Moe to another iconic name in show business. Together, they built a family, raising 2 children, Joan and Paul Howard. But behind the laughter and success was a habit that followed him for most of his adult life: constant smoking. Like many figures of his era, cigarettes were part of his daily routine, not something occasional. Over time, that habit quietly took its toll. Years of exposure to smoke weakened his lungs and increased the risk of serious disease. On May 4, 1975, Mo Howard passed away from lung cancer. It was a direct and severe consequence of long-term smoking. The damage had built up over decades, and by the time it became visible, there was little that could be done. Tragically, that same year, his wife Helen also passed away from a heart attack, marking a difficult period for the family. Even after his passing, Mo's legacy continued. In 1983, he was honored with a star on the Hollywood Walk of Fame, recognizing his impact on comedy and entertainment. His story didn't end there. His autobiography, left unfinished at the time of his death, was later completed by his daughter Joan and published in 1977. Mo Howard's life leaves behind two clear images, one filled with laughter and timeless comedy, and another shaped by a habit that carried serious consequences. It shows how something so common can quietly build into something far more dangerous over time. Frank Zappa, an artist known for bold ideas and fearless creativity, lived with the same intensity off stage as he did on it. Music was his obsession, but so was smoking. Not casually, not occasionally. This was constant. Whether he was writing, rehearsing, performing, or just living day to day, cigarettes were always there. Even after being diagnosed with prostate cancer, Zappa didn't step away from the habit. That alone shows how deeply ingrained it had become. According to his brother Bob Zappa, when asked if Frank smoked as much as their father, the answer was simple: more. And Frank himself once joked that tobacco was a vegetable. It sounds humorous on the surface, but the reality behind it is serious. That kind of statement reflects how smoking can be normalized, even minimized, especially when it becomes part of daily life. Calling tobacco a vegetable might be clever wordplay, but it ignores the fact that cigarettes contain toxic substances that damage the lungs, the blood vessels, and the entire body over time. Zappa's chain smoking was relentless. There were no breaks, no limits. At that level, the body is under constant attack. Over the years, the damage accumulates, quietly but steadily, until it reaches a point where it can no longer be reversed. In 1993, just 2 weeks before his 53rd birthday, Frank Zappa passed away. While multiple factors can affect health, long-term heavy smoking undeniably increases the risk of serious disease and weakens the body's ability to fight back. Do you agree with his way of thinking? Is it just humor, or does it downplay the real danger? If you agree, comment yes. If not, let us know why. George Harrison, legendary guitarist of the Beatles, was known for his quiet presence and deep musical talent. But behind that calm image was a long battle with smoking. This wasn't a light habit. At times, Harrison consumed up to 4 packs of cigarettes a day, occasionally adding cigars. That level of use placed him among the heaviest smokers of his era. His pattern wasn't constant, it rose and fell with stress. During calmer periods, he might reduce to 1 or 2 packs a day. But when pressure increased, so did the smoking, climbing back to 3 or even 4 packs. That cycle made the habit harder to control, reinforcing the addiction over time. Like many in that generation, smoking was normalized. It was part of the culture, part of daily life. But normalization doesn't reduce the damage. At that level, the body is exposed to a continuous stream of harmful chemicals affecting the lungs, throat, and overall immune system. Over the years, the consequences became clear. George Harrison developed smoking-related cancer and spent years battling the disease. Treatments could slow it down, but they couldn't fully undo the damage already done. His body had been under strain for too long. In 2001, George Harrison passed away. His life cut short after a prolonged fight with cancer. His case shows a pattern seen repeatedly. Heavy, long-term smoking leads to serious illness, and once it reaches an advanced stage, recovery becomes extremely difficult. What stands out is how the habit controlled his life. Stress pushed it higher, routine kept it going, and over time, it quietly dictated the outcome. His case makes one thing clear. Smoking heavily and consistently doesn't just harm the lungs. It increases the risk of lung cancer, throat cancer, heart disease, stroke, and severe respiratory failure. Damage builds up every day without you noticing. By the time you feel it, it's usually already serious and hard to fix. Jackie Kennedy, though not a Hollywood actress, I think she deserves mention here. She was an icon of elegance, style, and grace, admired worldwide as the image of the perfect First Lady. But behind that polished public image lay a little-known habit. She was a heavy and long-time smoker. Jackie reportedly smoked up to 3 packs of cigarettes a day, and she kept that routine for over 40 years. That level of use isn't occasional, it's constant exposure, day after day, year after year. The kind of habit that quietly puts serious pressure on the lungs, the heart, and the entire body. What makes her case stand out is how well it was hidden. Unlike many public figures, there are very few photos of Jackie smoking. That wasn't by accident. As First Lady, she had the influence to control her image. If she didn't want to be seen with a cigarette, that image simply didn't exist in public. Mentions of her smoking were also kept out of print as much as possible. So, while the world saw elegance and control, the reality behind the scenes was very different. The habit was there, just carefully kept out of view. At that level, smoking is never harmless. Do it long enough, and you're stacking the odds against your own body. Lung cancer, heart disease, breathing problems. It all creeps in sooner or later. The scary part? You don't feel it right away. It builds up quietly, day after day. Jackie Kennedy's case proves one thing. Just because it's hidden doesn't mean it's safe. You might not see the habit, but your body never misses a single cigarette. Don't let a hidden habit cost you your health. Quit early before the damage catches up. John Astin, best known for his role as Gomez Addams, helped create one of the most memorable characters in television history. Decades after the Addams Family first aired, the show still holds its place with audiences, and much of that comes from Astin's unique performance. What many don't realize is how much of himself he brought into that role. One of Gomez's defining traits was his love for cigars. It wasn't just a random detail. It came directly from Astin's own habit at the time. He openly admitted that he smoked cigars and felt it suited the character perfectly, comparing it to adding something simple but effective, like a mustache. That decision helped shape Gomez into the charming, eccentric figure people remember today. On screen, the cigars added a sense of style and confidence. The way Gomez lit and held them became part of his identity. Astin even chose shorter cigars to give the character a more refined, controlled image. It worked. Audiences loved it, and the habit became a signature part of the role. But here's what makes his case different from many others on this list. Once the show ended, Astin stepped away from the habit. He didn't carry it through the rest of his life. That choice matters. While cigars are sometimes seen as less harmful than cigarettes, they still expose the body to harmful smoke and increase the risk of health problems when used regularly. The difference is timing, how long the habit continues. John Astin's example shows something simple but important. A habit can start as part of a role or routine, but it doesn't have to define your life. Walking away early can make all the difference. Groucho Marx, one of the sharpest comedic minds in entertainment, built a style that was instantly recognizable. The mustache, the glasses, and of course, the cigar. It wasn't just a prop. It became part of who he was on stage and on screen. He picked up the habit early, around the age of 15, after being told by a seasoned performer that a cigar could be one of the most useful tools an actor had. And Groucho took that advice seriously. From that point on, the cigar became a constant companion, following him through theater, film, and television. On stage, it worked. The cigar added timing, personality, and even a bit of control. Groucho himself joked about it, saying if he ever forgot a line, all he had to do was take a puff and buy himself a few seconds to think. It was clever, practical, and it fit perfectly with his fast, improvisational style. Over time, the cigar became inseparable from his image. Audiences didn't just recognize Groucho, they recognized the cigar first. It helped define his presence, turning a simple habit into a signature. Initially, it was just a prop, Then it became a daily habit. Then it became something you need. That's how it creeps into your life. And yes, cigars may seem less serious than cigarettes, but don't get me wrong, it's still smoke going straight into your body, still harmful over time. Groucho's situation illustrates how a small thing can quickly cling to you for a lifetime. What started as a magic trick on stage turns into a habit you can't break. And after years, that cool image comes with a price you never expected. Red Fox, in his later years, lived a life shaped by constant pressure, both personal and professional. That pressure didn't just stay in the background. It showed up clearly, especially when combined with his long-standing habit of heavy smoking. Over time, it left a visible mark on him, most notably in his husky, distinctive voice. What once sounded unique and powerful gradually carried signs of strain, with the effects of smoking becoming more noticeable as the years passed. During the production of The Royal Family, things became even more intense. According to Della Reese, tensions flared between Fox and a producer. These weren't minor disagreements, they added real stress to an already demanding situation. Day after day, that pressure continued to build, both mentally and physically. It's important to remember that Fox had been a dedicated smoker since his younger years. This wasn't a short-term habit, it had followed him for decades. By the time these conflicts on set were happening, his body was already dealing with the long-term effects. When you combine years of heavy smoking with ongoing stress, the impact doesn't stay small. It builds layer by layer. In Fox's case, that combination may have played a role in the heart attack that ultimately took his life. Nothing about it was sudden in isolation. It was the result of everything adding up over time. Bing Crosby, a multi-talented entertainer known for his work in film, music, and radio, is also remembered for something more subtle, but just as iconic: his pipe. Unlike many others of his time who favored cigarettes, Crosby became closely associated with long, slender, long-stemmed pipes that turned into a signature part of his image. In the pipe-smoking community, that look became instantly recognizable. What's interesting is how that habit began. Crosby didn't always smoke pipes. He originally smoked cigarettes, but made a change out of respect for his mother, who strongly disliked them. According to accounts in Being Charles Thompson, he gave up cigarettes specifically because of her disapproval. That decision led him toward pipe smoking, which he embraced fully over time. Throughout his career, Crosby's pipe was rarely far from reach. It wasn't just a personal habit, it became part of how people saw him: calm, composed, and thoughtful. The pipe added to that image. He even spoke about it openly, offering simple advice on choosing and maintaining a good pipe. In his own words, "There's nothing like a good pipe and a good tobacco," a statement that reflected how much he valued the ritual. Compared to heavy cigarette smokers, pipe use may have seemed more controlled. But it still involved regular exposure to smoke, and over time, it remained a consistent part of his daily life. Bing Crosby's legacy goes far beyond smoking, but within that culture, he remains a true icon. His image, with that signature pipe, still stands as one of the most recognizable in entertainment history, a detail that followed him from the beginning of his career to the very end. Johnny Cash, even at the young age of 13, stepped into a habit that would stay with him for the rest of his life: smoking. Starting that early may sound surprising, but for Cash, it became part of his journey long before fame arrived. As his music grew stronger, so did the struggles behind it, with smoking becoming one of the habits that followed him through the decades. As the years passed, especially into the 1980s, the toll of his lifestyle began to show. Smoking, along with drug use, placed heavy strain on his body. His health started to decline, and the effects were no longer something he could ignore. His heart, in particular, suffered the most, leading to multiple medical issues that required serious intervention. Cash underwent several surgeries over time, on his knees, his heart, and even his jaw. These weren't minor procedures. They reflected a body that had been under pressure for years. Despite this, he continued to push forward, staying connected to his music and his audience. Unfortunately, his health challenges didn't stop there. He later developed autonomic neuropathy, a condition related to diabetes that affects the body's ability to regulate essential functions. This illness became severe enough to force the cancellation of his tours, something that deeply impacted both his career and his connection with fans. Johnny Cash's life tells a story that runs alongside his music, a story of early habits, long-term consequences, and the reality of how those choices can shape a lifetime. What began in his teenage years followed him through success, hardship, and ultimately into his later years, leaving a lasting mark beyond the stage. Bette Davis, one of the fiercest forces in classic Hollywood, didn't just play strong characters, she was one. Sharp voice, sharper stare, and a presence that could cut through any scene without raising the volume. Off camera, though, there was a habit that clung to her for decades. Smoking. Not a sometimes thing. More like a constant companion woven into long workdays, long nights, and the kind of relentless career pressure that never really lets up. For years, cigarettes were part of her image and part of her rhythm. Between takes, after takes, before the next fight with the studio, before the next line that had to land perfectly. And like so many people in that era, it was easy to treat it as normal. Because everybody did it, and everybody pretended it didn't matter. But the body doesn't care what was normal in Hollywood. Over time, the health consequences caught up. Later in life, Davis faced serious illness, including major surgery for cancer in her jaw, one of those brutal reminders that smoking doesn't just touch the lungs. It can hit the mouth, the throat, the voice, the face, the very tools a performer lives through. She kept pushing forward anyway because that was always her style. Keep moving, keep working, keep fighting. But her story lands the same lesson as the rest of this list. You can be iconic, unstoppable, untouchable on screen, and still be quietly losing ground to a habit that never plays fair. 11 names. 11 habits that refuse to stay behind the scenes. From old Hollywood legends to modern icons, the pattern never changed. What looked stylish, effortless, even iconic, came with a price most of them couldn't dodge. Some wore it like a signature, some hid it, some laughed it off, some tried to outrun it. But whether it was cigars, cigarettes, or a pipe, the ending always followed the same rule. The body keeps the record, and it always collects. That's the hard truth behind every story you just heard. Habits don't stay small. Give them enough time, and they start deciding the outcome. So take a second and ask yourself, what are you holding on to today that could cost you tomorrow? If smoking is part of your life, take this as your reminder. It's never too late to step back, make a change, and protect what truly matters. Take care of your health. And I'll see you in